So welcome, Peter, our beloved colleague, mentor, leader. I appreciate your consistent diligence and commitment to community economic development. As always, we begin all things at Setsi by acknowledging our creator, the original stewards of the various lands we're on. We acknowledge all our ancestors. We acknowledge all those who toiled without compassion or compensation. We acknowledge all the elders and community stalwarts whose shoulders we stand on as we build, share, and learn together for our collective liberation and sovereignty. So, Peter, please introduce yourself to our listeners and viewers and share a bit about your remarkable work, sir.
In the heart of Black African Nova Scotia, in town of Lockport, just outside of Shelburne, where the museum is. And so a lot of learning of understanding the rich history out here in Nova Scotia. But my heart's still in Toronto. And I've spent 32 years, I guess, working within the former city of York, and in particular Mount Dennis and Weston. And it's been an honor and privilege to work in those communities because they're open, because they say, how do we get her done? And they're more interested in positive outcomes for everybody than necessarily the right process. So that's been a huge privilege and honor for me over the last 32 years.
That's incredible. It's incredible, sir. So, Peter, what inspires you currently about your work? Is there anything inspiring you right now? Anything that's making you curious, that's making you excited?
Privilege is about having choice. Our work is to ensure everybody has choices. Period. That's what inspires me.
Well said. Well said.
Yeah, so, how do we do that? There isn't a game plan for it. You do it through humility, you do it through vulnerability, you do it through building relationships, and you do it through hope, which is just weaving together opportunities so that people can see possibility and they can see movement. And so it's not anything one person does. It's the art of weaving together what so many are doing into a picture of hope. We just got a report from our children and families group working with University of Waterloo Family Labs, and we were starting to see higher increases in children's optimism than in the general public. We presume through their engagement in childcare. When you consider the pressures that families are under, rent, fear of losing home, food, at a very, very basic level, and you consider the world that we're living in, with horrific war and destruction, it seems, all around us, with the insanity that is the USA to the south of us. What we see is real and appropriately placed fear in community meetings. And I have to add the words real and appropriately placed. And yet we can see children's optimism and outlook improving through these tests. And, there's more work to do to verify it and validate it. But my God, that's encouraging, because those are the tides that we're all swimming against.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And that's remarkable. That's remarkable work. I give thanks for sharing that. Thank you.
A small sample group. There's a lot more work to be done, but it's like,
regardless,
okay, that's already like all right. This is to put some numbers to things like that can just help us know that we're all doing good stuff in our own way, and it weaves together in a very powerful way, much more powerful than any of us can imagine on our own.
Yeah, that reminds me of the late great Dr. Gina Brown. Years ago, I was like young, 23, 24. She gave me a book called Flourish. And book Flourish was around positive youth development and looking at assets versus deficits.
Yeah.
And you tracking this work in terms of optimism in children, I think, is brilliant, but also shows that there is hope.
Oh, but do you remember we had a meeting with Dr. Gina Brown with the deputy of corrections.
I remember.
For those of us who are listening to this, Dr. Brown was an absolutely brilliant scholar, and a remarkable woman who came originally from Kentucky and had not lost a lot of the accent. And I'm sure I'm not doing any disfavor by mimicking in this way, but she leaned over to the deputy minister, held his hands and said, "Deputy, you're hurting your children." And she just let the pause be. And so privilege is having choice, and privilege is being able to speak the truth.
Yeah, see the truth of power. Yeah. So my
the
next question is, what challenges and barriers do you face in your work? And how are you and your team working towards overcoming some of these challenges?
Oh, it's a tiresome question.
It is.
Change the lens. Just got out of a meeting with our senior team. We have 6 or 7 different opportunities, just not program wise, just around, real estate and leveraging and what we can do. And our problem is not choosing. Our problem is coming up with the framework to analyze them so that we make the right choices. And so we get caught up in barriers so often. We get caught up, oh, you should do a feasibility study on that. We're trying to reduce poverty. Really? Like, just try it. Get to work. I think, launching an initiative and testing it for 6 months or 3 months is always cheaper than a feasibility study. Oh my goodness, we need to do a needs assessment. Good God, really? I mean, I'm looking at the list of people who you've done interviews with. It's really, really impressive. Every single one of them knows their community intimately and does not need to do a needs assessment because they haven't got an idea that's going to flood the market with anti-poverty and hope. So just get on with it. So I think it's not the barriers as much as it's the choices, and making the right choices that creates the momentum that allows people to see hope, that allows for the next wave of change.
So I have another question then. How do you see the future of the nonprofit sector in Canada?
In Ontario, we are already larger than construction and automotive combined. So I'm fearful because we've become used to being parasitic supplicants, and we are comfortable being patted on the head and told that's sweet. And yet we are quite powerful. There are leaders that understand the future, and our biggest job is to help the general public see that we are an integrated part of the economy. Not just supports for individual, but a living economy that grows, that produces, that creates wealth for all, which really was the intended goal of capitalism, was to create wealth for all. It was absconded with quite quickly in the game, but
yes.
So I think I think the future is strong, but I think we have to be strong enough to claim our place in a different language, our place in the economy, and our place as a vital part of the economy.
That makes perfect sense. And thank you so much for even sharing that stat, because it is true. A lot of times folks look at our sector as small. I'm not realizing that there's folks that are making payroll on 450 staff. There's large nonprofits that are huge value.
And then they say, well, where are you getting your money from, government? Well, yeah, and so is de Havilland.
Yeah.
And you don't question their place in the economy.
That's a fact.
So most of our 90% of our contracts are fee for service. And I think as nonprofits start to examine their contracts through different lens, they'd realize how much of their contracts were actually fee for service, and not generous charity from Lady Bountiful.
That's a fact. So my next question is, What is your ultimate goal, and what does success look like to you and your colleagues?
I mean, I would go back to what I said at the beginning. Success is about having choice. So success for our clients, individuals in our community, is about them having choice. And right now, depending on where you are, there aren't a lot of choices. When you're working 3 part-time jobs and you've got kids and you're running an Uber at night and you're, just hanging on, it doesn't feel like there's a lot of choices. And even if there are, you don't have barely have the time to consider them. And then I'd like to see community collectively have choices and have a say. Through the brilliance of Sean Gadden and Francis Nunziata, we've launched and handed over the Mount Dennis for All community plan, which actually puts affordable housing and recreation and community space targets on the backs, the accountability to sit with planning. And it's really interesting because in our system of city building, the planners hold all the power and have none of the accountability except to abstract rules that have been created. So choice for individuals, choice and influence for communities as a whole. And I guess for the Learning Enrichment Foundation, just always been and remain just a steward of its nimbleness. And I think not actually being able to define necessarily the thing we're hoping to be nimble to do, because we don't know yet, but always being nimble and being able to take advantages of the opportunities that arise in moments in time. So it's a very mercurialistic kind of way of looking at things. But so often when you see something that needs to change, and my God, do I honor the people who then dig in and fight for that change, right? And it takes forever. And we're always supportive, always been supportive of those groups. But that is exhausting work. To be on the lookout for community, because we're in community development, to just be on the lookout for opportunities becomes actually quite joyful work. And so I've been very privileged in that the work has been joyful as we look for opportunities and we move them forward. In order to create that privilege of choice, and in order to create those opportunities for hope and for building hope, but we still have to dig in on the systemic issues, and fight those longer fights. In a lot of cases, it's just building awareness, right? It's just helping people understand what they don't understand and seeing it in its full context. And that's where Setsi has been, I gotta say, absolutely brilliant. The determination. So we've looked at community financing and this social innovation financing, whatever word it's had for the last 20 years. And none of it has ever really spoken to Mount Dennis or the former city of York, right? And then along comes Setsi, who actually names, and now I'm putting words in Setsi's mouth, but too much of what's going on now is about the redemption of the rich and the institutionalized investor on their terms with no real change. And Setsi's been one of the few and only voices that has been at the table and not groveling, and just speaking that truth. And it's disarming. So I mean, I come back from a couple days in Newfoundland around the Social Impact Summit for the Atlantic provinces, and everybody's being very polite. Canadian and East Coasters, it's all very polite. And yet you then have this conversation around it. Doesn't this just like it's just the bank, but it's been painted a different color, and they all go, oh yeah, we're not ready for that. We're not ready for that. And so what you find is those pockets of resistance as one has the conversation and speaks the truth are stronger than you think. And too often there aren't enough of us in the room to just speak the obvious. Usually better to be spoken as a question than a statement of blame. And let the power of numbers and independent thought just unfold from there.
I think that's so put it back on you. I think that's always been the brilliance that I've seen in you and LEF. The very first moments I remember walking in the Learn Enrichment Foundation at 116 Industry Streets in New York Southwest, in one of the poorest ridings in the country, and being familiar with the Western Mount Dennis community for years, like going to all the stores and being connected. I remember seeing Toronto. Like there was more racialized and Black people in that building than some of the Black-led organizations that I was working with. And I said, well, this is absolutely remarkable. And then in terms of creating pathways for organizations like Setsi to convene meetings, to hold space, to convene gatherings, to ideate, I think speaks to the resistance that's needed, because the revolution has been colonized. Most revolutionary thoughts, paradigms, ideas in various sectors have colonial frameworks almost placed on them. So I applaud LEF for being one of those spaces and those organizations that's always on the cutting edge of creating space, safe spaces. Yeah.
Don't applaud too much. It's really simple. Why do we put so much effort in so many pockets of our lives into saying no? For the last 40 years, LEF, in a very simple and straightforward manner, has kept our eyes collectively open, our hearts open, our arms open, and our effort into saying yes. If one puts one's effort into saying yes, then all sorts of things start to happen that you would have never imagined. And so, and you do say no sometimes. You have to say no. And so in sharing space in the building and a culture of collaboration, well, if we can't come up with a good reason, if we got 3 good reasons to say yes, and the no's are really just administrivia, then yeah, let's get over it and let's see what happens. Right. And then the other one I love is, oh, but it might fail. Okay. Did we hurt anyone? No. Okay.
So Peter, it's your 90th birthday. Friends, family around. What do you want to hear about Peter Frampton, the person, the colleague, the mentor, the friend, the ally, the leader?
Well, if I'm still alive and at that birthday party, I hope there's some good. I hope there's some good scotch flowing, and I hope people are talking not about necessarily me or whatever, but just sharing stories of like we did around that meeting with Gina Brown, or oh God, Victor, I can think of a few others. The work has to be joyful work. So if people were going to come together for my 90th, I hope they'd just be an evening of fabulous stories amongst everybody and with everybody, about everybody, because there's a realization that this work can be joyful. And in fact, it must be joyful for us to have any impact. And so that would be my hope. And, the quality of the scotch, really don't care, as long as there's some. It helps to enhance the stories.
Indeed. Peter, it's been an absolute pleasure. My last question, do you have any closing thoughts or call to action for our listeners and our viewers?
Speak the truth in the room you're in. There's probably 8 other people thinking it and not feeling comfortable enough to speak it. Understand your privilege and hold on to it and wield it and never be ashamed of it.
Well said. And we'll close the way we began this interview by acknowledging our creator, acknowledging the original stewards of the various lands we're on. We acknowledge all our ancestors. We acknowledge all those who toiled without compassion or compensation. We acknowledge all the elders and community stalwarts whose shoulders we stand on as we build, share, and learn together for our collective liberation and sovereignty. Thank you so much, Peter, for all that you do for so many.
Thank you.